if you don't have the fortitude to keep going, I think you would really very quickly run back into whatever you thought was safe before you got into entrepreneurship. Research is seeing what everyone else sees and then thinking something else that no one else has thought, okay? All right. So my name is Christopher Gitonga. It appears as such on LinkedIn. I'm an entrepreneur. We're building a pharmaceutical manufacturing presence in East Africa. And these are doses for human consumption, yeah? I'll give you a preamble of how all this started, because long ago when I graduated from the university, all I wanted to do was to be an employee somewhere, grow myself and my career, become a C-suite executive in a Fortune 500 company. Yeah? So I started my consulting career in research, market and marketing research under the training of GFK.
Okay.
Then after that, I went into brands because again, I was still eyeing that C-suite office at the end of the day. Yeah. So I went into brands, I came back to Kenya, then I shifted to Uganda. Took up a position in a local pharmaceutical cosmetics manufacturing entity. Grew my portfolio, okay? Then a global FMCG company now poached me from Uganda, brought me back to Nairobi to head the Eastern African operations. Okay.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was still continuing with my consulting, with my career in research, because now GFK had already shut down its operations in East Africa, but they were still calling us, okay? To assist them with projects here and there, yeah. Other people like Euromonitor also came into the play. But I guess for me, the pinnacle of my career was when I joined the Aga Khan, development network under IPS, deputy the group head of commercial. So now in that role, I got interested in the broader picture beyond manufacturing, beyond day-to-day, business management. How does this super entrepreneur by the name His Excellency, operate? Okay, that piqued my interest. One of the industries that he had a very keen interest in is pharmaceuticals. Before then, I hadn't worked in pharmaceuticals at all, but within that framework of IPS, I discovered Kampala Pharmaceuticals, and I got very, very interested in how drugs are made. What is this ecosystem? What is the market for pharmaceuticals in East Africa? Is it covered? Is there a huge gap? Is there a need? What can I do about it? Okay. And true to my research, I discovered that it's a huge growing market for pharmaceuticals in East Africa. And unfortunately, we've got very little manufacturing capacity across the entire region, right? So case in point, Kenya is about $1.2, $1.3 billion a year worth in pharmaceuticals. 80% of this is imported from India, from Europe and other places. Okay? My idea is, why don't we bring into play some of this manufacturing capacity ourselves as young people, who are transitioning from C-suite executives to entrepreneurship? Why don't we bring that capacity here? What's preventing us from doing so? There's actually absolutely nothing, yeah? And that's why we got into it. Myself and a couple of my friends, doctors, pharmacists, and engineers, decided we're going to do something about it. And we are doing something about it. Now, the other funny thing I discovered is, Kenya is importing 80% of what it needs, but then it exports 50% of everything it has into the greater Comesa region, okay? So it becomes just an entry point, and then it disperses all that medicine into different countries in Eastern, Central and Southern Africa. Yeah, which means the potential is really, really huge. And my interest in Ethiopia actually falls in the same line, because Ethiopia is also trying to do what we are trying to do here. See, during the COVID period, we discovered that we are at a disadvantage, and a big one, because we got our vaccines 9-10 months down the line. Yeah. Same thing happened to the greater Eastern African region. Other countries got their vaccines a year plus later. Okay. Ethiopia was in that foray. And so I've been keenly observing also the initiatives that are being taken, to introduce and even to scale up pharmaceutical manufacturing and all other manufacturing in Ethiopia in general.
Wow, that's very impressive. From your experience now, I believe it's been 2 years now since you launched.
Yes, it's been 2 years, because we actually launched sometime in 2022.
Yeah.
The entirety of 2023 has been, the build up to where we are now.
Oh, what's the progress so far since launching?
Okay, so we looked at the problem in two ways, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, we do need a lot of manufacturing capacity, but before we get to actual manufacturing, we need to start by pulling in technologies, okay?
Yeah.
So what we did is we got into talks with firms in Germany and Sweden, some in India and China, yeah, to see how we can begin by trading in medical devices, okay? Medical devices, then we transition into manufacturing. And in the course of trading in medical devices, we found ourselves needing to build a brand, okay? I remember mentioning to you on the sidelines that we had a lot of trouble attracting funding, okay? Like the money is available, but because most of the people want to, finance organizations which have been already in practice for some time. Yeah, that's the meat and bone of private equity anyway. Yeah, most of them are sitting on undeployed cash that they cannot issue to us until we show some form of traction or the other. So we needed to build ourselves a brand name. What we've done is we went to a company in India and we told them to manufacture for us products, 8 specific products, okay, in our brand name so that we can begin building up our name in Kenya slowly, as our intention was to get into the Greater Eastern Africa all at once. Yeah. So we're going to build that up slowly. So far, we've accomplished the ability now to bring in 8 essential medicine products, okay, that will only be distributed within Kenya. Again, we had established an agreement, a deal with a distributor here long beforehand, yeah. Because what they told us when they discovered we are aiming for manufacturing is, Chris, if you can make these specific drugs for us, we are ready to push them into the entire Eastern African market for you. Okay. These are the places we have issues with as far as importation and distribution is concerned. Solve them for us, and we will solve everything else for you. Yeah. So that's where we are. We are trading in devices. We are trading in some medicine. As we transition towards establishing our own plants and then manufacturing locally.
Wow.
Now, ironically, even with local manufacturing, we still need some bit of importation. Reason being, there isn't a single company in Kenya that is actually producing the active pharmaceutical ingredients that we need. Okay. That problem is the same across the Greater Eastern African region, right? So right now, I think even India is finding itself needing to import active pharmaceutical ingredients from China.
So this is
again,
one of the questions that I was gonna maybe, because I don't have that much experience in pharmaceuticals, but to elaborate more, one of the things that also intrigued my curiosity was talking from experience in Ethiopia. We have some plants that manufacture medicine. We have some factories already existing that are maybe state owned, but I don't know about the exact details. So what makes it this? Now you just mentioned that the active pharmaceutical ingredients.
2 key parts you need if you need to get into manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. One of them is the formulation, okay, what you call formularies. Different firms from around the world spend a lot of money and energy, trying to create a particular formula that will attack a certain disease a certain way, okay? So those formularies are usually very, very expensive. They take time to recoup the investment before they release it into the general market, after which now it becomes a generic formulation, okay? So generic formulations are cheaper, and that is what most countries in Africa are actually able to afford, right? Most of the companies that are manufacturing pharmaceuticals in Africa do not have R&D facilities here. And if you listen to the people who are actually doing it big in the greater world, yeah, the AstraZenecas, the likes of Moderna, they invest billions and billions of dollars into a particular product before they release it, okay? So then those become very proprietary formulations and formularies. That's item number 1. The second thing will be the active pharmaceutical ingredients, okay? The active molecule that actually has pharmacological benefits or capabilities, right? That would be item number 2. So think about it. If you need to establish a manufacturing facility, you have to figure out where to get your formulation from, and 2, where to get your active pharmaceutical ingredients from. Again, API, as we call them, are not necessarily medicine in themselves. So they need to be blended a certain way according to the formulation. And part of these things that we add into the active a molecule to make it medicine now, what we call excipients, okay? The binding agents, the water, the whatnot, such things, yeah? So those three make up the medicine itself, right? Then after you manufacture the medicine, you've got to package it. And then people in logistics like yourselves now take it over, getting it from the point it's manufactured to where it's needed.
Okay. So yeah, going back to it being a big industry in the rest of the world, and now it makes sense to me what makes it so different. And I was, before this interview, like this conversation, I was looking up looking for statistics, like how big is this market. And I've always heard that pharmaceuticals is just like, it's huge. It's beyond comprehension. And I saw some companies with a market share of $578 billion, and funny enough, most of them are in weight loss drug manufacturing for some reason. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I've seen a couple companies, and most of them are in billions and billions of dollars, like 400, 500, 300 billion market share. And it's
now funny thing is, yeah, our markets are still a drop in the ocean when you look at the global pharmaceutical market potential. Okay, so in Kenya we're mentioning $1.2 billion a year. That's almost negligible. It's almost the budget of one manufacturing or designing one drug, you know, for someone like AstraZeneca. Okay, so the entirety of the African market is really not as big as we would want it to be. Yes, it is the fastest growing in the world, because when I look at, for example, Kenya, the sales potential growth is upwards of 13% year on year, okay? Which is way above inflation rates or anything else. So it's growing very fast, but it's still, you know, a big slice of a very small pie. The larger market, the global pharmaceutical market, is a large pie, okay? And the African market is a very small slice of that large pie. You mentioned the weight loss drugs and whatnot, and you realize that, yes, that is correct, because we've got what we classify as essential medicine, and weight loss drugs are not really essential medicine. Okay, essential medicine is what goes into the treatment of, you know, the regular common diseases that you find with people around here. We know we are living in a malaria endemic area. We've got sanitation issues, so cholera, tuberculosis, blah blah blah, are prevalent where we are. So essential medicine will be the medicine catering to the diseases that are usually prevalent in the areas that we are in. Okay. But when you look at now such things as weight loss solutions, those go into lifestyle issues, right? And that's why you find that most of them are branded. By branded, I mean they're still being manufactured using formulations which are very new, that are not really generic. So companies are differentiating themselves using such, okay? But in Africa, they aren't really the largest market, if I was to say so. The most expensive drugs that are coming into Africa right now are oncology drugs. These are drugs aimed at what? Cancers, different kinds of cancers, right? That is what most African governments are finding themselves spending so much on. Almost even up to 70% of their, you know, medicine importation budgets are going into oncology drugs. And again, you'll see it's because governments have taken it upon themselves to try and solve this oncological crisis around different countries in Africa. So most private companies like ours will not be getting into oncology medicine. One, because again, the formulations are still very, very new. On rare occasions, you may find the World Health Organization may be offering, you know, free formulations on certain issues, but I've not seen any on oncology so far, right? I've seen some on diarrhea and whatnot. So as of now, private companies coming up in Africa are not likely to deal in oncology medicine, but that's the bulk of the medicines budgets for different countries across Africa. Lifestyle diseases generally attract a lot of attention because, again, just like cosmetics or, you know, personal care products, a lot of people are willing to spend money on them, yeah, and actually spend a lot of money to try and solve one or two issues in their bodies. That's why, you know, that market size you're hearing around the world is really huge, yeah, because there are a lot of people who are willing to cough a lot of money to acquire such solutions.
Yeah, okay. So one last question, and then we'll go into how your company is positioning itself now that I have a general understanding of how the market is and what the problem is. I want to hear how you're trying to position your company to solve this problem. But before that, you mentioned that there is for Kenya alone, it's 1.3 billion annual uh, consumption, and 80% of it is imported. What do you have a general estimate for the African or the Eastern region, since you're focusing on the Eastern region?
I think it depends with the nominal GDP of each country. Okay, so to a certain extent, medicines are a very small part of the consumption, right? Look at it this way. In Kenya, in 2022, imported medicine worth about $1.2 billion for the entire year. Okay. Diaspora remittances were 3 times that, $3.6 billion a year. Okay, so we compare that and it's such a small figure. But then again, Kenya is a what? $120 billion a year market in terms of nominal GDP. So you can get a feel of what proportion medicine actually occupies in the greater economy and how it compares to other things that are generally happening. Okay. When you look at Ethiopia, which I believe has now gotten to about $160 billion in nominal GDP, yeah? Again, based on how much importation you do, you start to get a proportion, a feel of the proportionality of how much you're going to spend on medicine. You look at Uganda, which is about $50 billion, economy. Again, the proportion becomes less and less. Again, the same case with Tanzania. But generally speaking, most countries are importing medicine. Now, that's not to say that they're not doing something about it. I know a country like Uganda is already doing a lot about it, giving free land to global pharmaceutical manufacturers and local manufacturers to set up there. Okay. Tanzania is doing the same. Ethiopia is also doing the same. So I think in another 10 years, maybe our dependence on imports generally as the region will have come down slightly to about 60 or so percent.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for that. And now, how do you, first of all, I should have started with this question, but let's start with the name also, your company name, your startup name, and then now that we have a general idea of the problem, I want to hear like how your company is positioning itself to solve this issue.
So my company's name is Xenum, Xenum, Xenum Pharma. Xenum Pharma, and started from my other company, Xenum Kenya Limited, which was my research consulting firm. And that name itself comes from a Greek word that was used long ago, Xenium, yeah? It means gift, right? So we want to become a gift to the communities in Eastern Africa. And our decision has been, if we are able to reach scale in Kenya, we have to reach out to the rest of the region, because the problems we are facing in healthcare in Kenya are largely similar to the problems that we're facing around the Eastern African region. And I, having visited different countries around the area, actually by driving, not flying, they're driving and going through communities and speaking with people there, you get to get a feel of, what the problems are in these communities. And yes, one of them is access to essential medicine. The other one is access to medical services themselves. Now, governments take upon themselves to cater for the medical services, but then the medicine aspect has to fall on us in the private sector. Because as at now, I don't think there is any government that is actively manufacturing medicine around Eastern Africa. They have left that to the private sector.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's one key thing you mentioned is also you drove around and you saw the problems firsthand. You experienced what actually we need, and then it's very heroic of you, I would say, to say we cannot just keep it in Kenya, but we have to expand and we have to share the solution to the rest of the Eastern region, and then hopefully the rest of Africa. But how would you also saw it on your company statement that it's you're working towards affordable affordable quality therapeutics and vaccines to the greater sub-Saharan region. So how do you balance profits to impact and affordability as a company what are the steps that you're taking to guarantee that you stay affordable, that you can address these problems and you can reach these communities, but yet as a company you can sustain, and it's a business, you have to make profit. So what are the challenges in that area, and what are the steps that you're taking?
Okay, so when it comes to affordability, of course, the pricing has to be reasonable, right?
Yeah.
So the question becomes, as a businessman, what do you consider as reasonable? And we do have our threshold, again, which is not really a price that we've picked from our heads or an island somewhere. It's in consideration with the pre-existing circumstances. Okay, we've got a few other people who are doing this in this market, right? So at what threshold do we price our products comparative to what they're actually pricing? And for us to get comfortable doing that, we've got to look at the value chain from where we are backwards to the very beginning, okay? So again, we've got to look at the cost of the formulations. We've got to look at the cost of the active pharmaceutical ingredients. The excipients, not so much, they are negligible. Then we also got to consider the cost of packaging, right? After that, we have to really keenly look at the people we are partnering with on logistics to get what we need from where it is that we are sourcing from, where we need to use it from, which is Nairobi, Kenya, right? Let me break it down for you. I said that we are focusing on essential medicine. One key element that we've chosen to, again, focus in and on within that essential medicine subcategory is generic medicine, which means these are formulations which are no longer being exploited to recoup R&D costs from, right? So these are formulations that we can acquire reasonably priced, okay? Which means as well, the active pharmaceutical ingredients that we're going to acquire need to be reasonably priced as well, because the cumulative cost needs to be at a certain threshold so that we can make money and remain affordable in the market. And the consideration I was mentioning to you earlier about active pharmaceutical ingredients is this. It takes a lot of electricity to produce active pharmaceutical ingredients, okay? And when we look at our current cost of electricity in Kenya, it's about 30 cents US dollars, yeah, per kilowatt hour, which is about the same as Uganda, which is about the same as Tanzania. Ethiopia might be slightly lower because of the GAD dam that was just built the other day, yeah? But it's the same as what is being made in India, because India is about 25 cents per kilowatt hour. But when you look at China, which has invested so much in electricity in the last 30 years, you find that the cost of electricity is about actually 5 cents US dollars per kilowatt hour. So they are able to produce active pharmaceutical ingredients so much more affordably than any other country in the world right now, okay? Yes, so then we've got to look at such factors ourselves seated in Nairobi and consider acquiring API from China as compared to other countries where the source might be suggested. Okay, then we also look at the packaging material. All across Africa, there was a period when we cut down a lot of trees. We were exporting timber from Congo and where not, and it made paper and other products very, very expensive right now, this part of the world. So we are finding ourselves needing to acquire packaging material from other parts of the world, parts like India, which has been manufacturing pharmaceuticals for so many years and so many generations. So they've got established packaging, or what we call packmat value chains, that we do not have here. There we have our options here, but they are considerably much more expensive. So we're finding ourselves, needing to import such things as well. But all we do when we get here is formulate it, blend it very well, and package it, then disperse it into the market. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is, we are finding ourselves starting a company in a time period where everyone cares about the environment, and we do too, yeah? So all that we do is ESG focused, right? We've got to think about our environment, we've got to think about our societies, and we've got to think about how we govern every node in our business, okay? So when it comes to logistics, we have to look for a partner who's also very keen, yeah, on what impact they are having, what carbon footprint they are having. We've got to consider if we're shipping things in by air, what's the carbon footprint for that airline? If we're shipping it by sea, what's the carbon footprint that shipping line, has? around the world. Again, taking learnings from companies like Nestle, who got into trouble about greenwashing, or even Brazil's JBS, the meat company that got into trouble because its suppliers were cutting down the Amazon forest, to raise cattle so that they can supply them. So we've got to look at all those things. So in a way, the greener you are right now, the more reasonable your cost structure is likely to be. Okay, the initial investment might be high, but over time, that unit cost reduces significantly the greener you are. And that sums it up in a way to tell you that we get our product cost at a certain threshold so that we are able to sell it affordably within these markets.
Well, earlier we were discussing about fundraising, and then you're also working on achieving certain milestones that then you can be eligible to unlock this. The money's there. It's just that you need to be at a certain level. So I'm curious, now you're also trading equipments, medicine, and then getting traction in Kenya. And then now what seems to be the next step? What seems to be the next milestone for your company?
Okay, so we've designed it as such. It's only going to be 2 key milestones ultimately. We can trade now as we build a brand name, but our aim is to actually manufacture everything from here. If it's the devices that we're dealing in, we need to get into a deal with our suppliers so that we can manufacture them from Nairobi. Again, with the medicine, that has always been the plan. So ultimately, in the next 2-3 years, I would expect that we'll be having a plant in Kenya. Yeah, actually, you talked about financing. When I look at the financing scene in Africa, for private equity and venture capital, I was doing some research on it last week, and it came to my attention that in the entirety of the year 2022, the continent of Africa only attracted $7.5 billion worth of investment in both private equity and venture capital. Then Asia and Asia Pacific at the same period attracted about $250 billion. Okay, so it makes me wonder what it is about the entirety of the African continent that we can only attract this much money, whereas another part of the world is attracting hundreds, multiples of that amount in the same time period. Okay. Well, yeah, Africa is still a very young financial market, so to speak. Okay, so our systems are still developing, but it's a vast blue ocean of opportunity for both venture capital and private equity, right? And I think their problem is to decide what kind of fish they want out of this ocean, right? The private equity wants to go for Moby Dick, big companies which are already $10 million in revenue and up, right? Then the VCs are very selective. But again, there is a pie, there is a space for everybody. All that we need to do is to reach a certain threshold, meet certain requirements, and then we can access that capital. On the other hand, the same financing entities are also looking into the market keenly, so as I can see, because I discovered the investments they do in Asia is a blend of PE and VC. It's not really purely either, right? So they look at the situation and analyze it specifically, then make a decision. In Africa, we're still working with very strict, guidelines from their head offices, mostly from the developed West. So that element is something I believe, and I've heard from the ones who are sitting on undeployed cash, that they are working on. They're trying to, find a way of blending VC and PE so that more money can get into project companies. Yeah.
Okay. Other than, I wish we can get more detail into, because that would be very important for our audience as well. I wish there was more that we can talk about your personal experience in the fundraising journey, and what are the challenges that you've experienced, and if you were to do it again, what steps would you take 2 years ago if you were going to start Xenum again? What would be the steps that you would take to get your company fundraising rating?
Yeah, actually, that's the word that you've used. Yeah, to get it funding ready. Yes, the idea is great. The idea is sound, a lot of attraction from around the world. But then what I did when I started fundraising for it is I went for grants on one end, grants to enable me to carry out a feasibility study, which will then make me investor ready, right? And I discovered it's not really that simple, straightforward, even with grants, right? With grant organizations, they also want to see several years of traction before they can commit the amount of funding that is necessary to get you to that level of affording a feasibility study for such a project as the one as I'm carrying out. I thought at that time I didn't have a very good background of how much it would cost to actually get the feasibility study done. Yeah, and I came to discover later on it was upwards of $110,000 just to get the feasibility study done for a manufacturing plant in Nairobi. That's a lot of money,
That's a lot.
And even after years of working as a C-suite executive, that's not the kind of money you just cough from the back of your hand, your hand, and say, take this and go. No, it's a lot of money. So we had to figure out how to adapt so that we can at least try and succeed. We found ourselves needing to do a pre-feasibility study instead, okay, where you do something that is sufficing for a grant organization. But then again, that also takes time. It will take several months of your time to get that feasibility study done, and then several other months of discussion to even get a grant in. Okay, so that is one thing that I would correct. I would get into it having already done a pre-feasibility study so that I can go straight into a feasibility study. Then you realize there are partners like the African Development Bank or Exim Bank who have instruments which can facilitate these kinds of things that we call project preparations. Okay, all these expensive feasibility studies and such. But then to unlock that financing again, they have their own list of demands, right? It's not that the money comes in simple straightforward. For example, they offered me $2 million way back when I started, provided I meet certain requirements. Some of the requirements would have been I be certain that there is other money coming in from a certain area, or at least I have raised a certain amount before I go to them. They want to give you support for project preparation when they're already certain that you have worked out everything and this project will, it will take place, it will be executed. Yeah. The other thing I would do is I would limit the number of people I would speak to. I think in 2022 I was over exuberant. I spoke to over 700 people from every corner of the world. Yeah, Australia, Europe, Asia, Kenya itself, different parts of Africa. I was so determined to get this thing off the ground that I ended up, selling it as a mass product when then it was actually a very niche thing. Yeah. So I would limit the number of people I spoke to because eventually the solutions came from, very few out of those. I think out of 700 conversations, only 5 were maybe, and only 1 ended up being, something that we can work with right now. Yeah. I will also limit the number of people I talk to. Then 3, I would also focus on what we are doing now. Start getting your name into the industry, get your company registered, not only by the government, but also the pharmacies and poisons boards and such organizations. Yeah, get a product in, get it registered, tested, bureau standards, all those things. Yeah, so that by the time your investors are coming in, they're looking at something that is already in existence. You can point at an actual product, and you can look at actual figures in your spreadsheets or what you're using for accountability. The 4th and last thing I would do is I would get into an ERP system much earlier. All right.
Sorry, what was that?
See, what most of us do is we do spreadsheets, we do PowerPoint presentation, we do Word documents and whatnot, we put them together, but there is no, consolidated view of everything that you're doing. So if I was to go back 2 years, I think I would start with actually securing an enterprise resource program from the very onset. Okay. Get into something like Zoho, Oracle, NetSuite, or Odoo, anything that, your investor comes in, they put in money in the bank account, and you can tell them log in into the system and see, this is what we have traded today. This is what we have done this week. This is what we intend to do next week. And they have a very clear picture of the business you're doing from whichever part of the world that they would be in, without necessarily having to wake you up, at 3 a.m. in the morning because of time differences. Yeah.
Making sure that you're already existing your company is well structured or organized before you bring in any funding, even at a small scale. That's so important and so true in many ways. Probably my last question would be, I don't want to take too much of your time. I've like seen you're so well versed in the business that you're doing, and then you've spent some. I went back to it several times as well in a long time in corporate world. How did that your experience in branding, your experience in research, your experience in consulting? What would you say took? What takes the lion's share of now your success so far in building your business?
I'd say I've discovered, there's a big difference between knowledge and know-how. Okay.
Yeah.
So you go to school, you get your knowledge. You work a bit, you attain some bit of know-how. But then whatever you do within the confines of someone else's investment is very different from what you do as your own, investor, not necessarily your own boss. You can be your own boss even when employed, but as your own investor, that's something totally different. You find that even when you know what you're doing, the challenges can become so much, and if you don't have the confidence and decisiveness to keep going, chances of giving up are very, very high. Okay. All through these 2 years, for me, have been a roller coaster. When I was speaking to the 700 people I was telling you about, you get a lot of optimism, and then suddenly someone drops off. No communication. They just ghost you for, properly ghosting you, and then you're left wondering, oh, did I do something wrong? Is it something I said? And at that point in time, if you don't have the fortitude to keep going, I think you would really very quickly run back into wherever you thought was safe before you got into entrepreneurship. Yeah? And lastly, I think confidence in what you're doing and confidence in what you know also helps, because there is a way you can present yourself as an entrepreneur before people and they lose confidence in you immediately, even at first glance. Okay. That has nothing to do with your experience. I think that's more of a personality trait or something that you can cultivate within yourself, after years of, standing with people, talking with people, and getting, to close deals with people. Yeah. So the experience that I have so far all played a role, yeah, in getting me from where I was when I just had an initial idea to where I am now that I'm seeing results for, sticking it through and, sticking with the idea up to when it came to fruition. Research is very key. Again, I don't know, I can't remember who said this, but someone said that research is seeing what everyone else sees and then thinking something else that no one else has thought. Okay. So that is one thing that, an entrepreneur needs, because the market is very competitive, So the research arm plays a very big role. Again, the control, the management, the overall management of the business is something else. You've got to know how to handle your people. You've got to know what product you're going with. And you have to think of it, through the entire life cycle up to when it will become irrelevant. And then what will you do after it has become irrelevant? You got to think about all that. You got to think about the marketing mix, okay? And after all that, you've got to know how to manage every other person you need in your organizations. There are so many value chains and there are so many nodes to getting something like what I'm doing up and running. So many people to talk to in different parts of the world, and many people to deal with even here at government level, at supplier level, customer level. There are so many people to deal with. So knowing how to deal with each is very key. And you also have to learn how to delegate, because you can't do it all yourself. Yeah. Yeah. So you've got to hire people who you're confident can do what you can do and even better, and then let them work.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's very, very insightful. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time again. And I want to conclude with giving you the say and how we can help and what's the next step. I mean, there might be in the future, maybe as the community growing and as we build our audience throughout Africa, you have plans to expand to, and starting from the eastern region, you have plans to expand to the rest of the across the Kenyan border. So, what should we expect in the coming few years?
My thinking is, I saw your team is a very young team, so the world is a big pool of opportunity for you guys. This is just one of many, and it would be an honor to see some of you coming to us and saying, "Hey, we saw you on a certain video in our platform. We're thinking of doing ABCD. We've got this product that we're launching. It's an ERP system. It's an app that helps you, sell pharmaceuticals in Uganda or Congo, and we want to partner with you in it." Right? So the way I look at it is, I see young people like you, and I see potential for people who can add value to me in more than one way, not necessarily, formal employment. There are things that we have discussed between you and I today that you might think of giving a solution for, either now or further down the line. You know where to find me. Tell me, Chris, we discussed EFGH and I went and thought of XYZ. This is what I'm thinking. Can we do it or not? And I'll be able to analyze that and give you feedback, right? And as you go out there in the world, you in China, other people in your group are in other parts of the world, you can find some insight that I may not be having at that point in time. I know API are cheaper to produce in China, but who knows? You might cross over the border into Vietnam and find that it's even cheaper there. Yeah. So you give me a ring and say, "Hey, Chris, China is not the cheapest. Come to Vietnam." Yeah. And because you're in logistics also and others, you can also tell me, "Hey, you've been dealing with this and this guy. Actually, I know someone better where they're cheaper or their ESG policy is good or, such things." And we sit down and discuss. So that there is the notion of opportunities, and I'd be glad to engage with you guys again and again. Yeah. As we see how to grow together. There is no point in us building a company, then, it becomes a behemoth. And then we die and it collapses because no one else took up the vision, you see.
Very key.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, honestly, Chris, and I hope we will reconvene sometime later in the future and see the progress that you've made with your company, Xenum Gift. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a true pleasure, and thank you again.